Good morning. Welcome back. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez now being invited to defend her Green New Deal in a debate with a climate expert who thinks it's all wrong.
But first, that expert, Dr. Caleb Rossiter, is joining us to explain why he's taking aim at the far-left climate policy. Sir, thanks for coming on this morning. Just to start off, you stand in the face of a lot of science and a lot of evidence that suggests that we're heating this planet up and we're doing irreparable damage to it. Give us your perspective.
That's a great way to frame it, Rob, because there's a scientific consensus that we do heat the planet when we burn fossil fuels and they emit this harmless pollutant called carbon dioxide. But it's a bait and switch going on, and has been for about 15 years, probably made most famous by Al Gore. There is no scientific consensus that that tiny amount of warming, far less than 1 degree over the last 120 years, which is due to carbon dioxide, is having any damage on the planet whatsoever. That's the bait and switch. The scientific consensus does not relate to climate catastrophe. There's been no statistically significant increase in, the number of storms, the rate of sea level rise, the number of droughts. All these end-of-the-world predictions are not the scientific consensus. I agree with the scientific consensus, and so do my physicists and agronomists, in our coalition, that there is a slight warming because of carbon dioxide. But climate catastrophe, justifying the end of our fossil-fueled economy, is simply not a scientific fact.
So if you were face-to-face with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez right now, what would you say to her?
I would say to Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, and I've asked her to be with me so she can hear it, the same thing I said to my statistics students at American University for 15 years. What do you believe about the effect of the slight warming on climate variables like storms, droughts, hailstones, and other catastrophic events, and why do you believe it? Show me the evidence. She'll be unable to, because the very studies that she cites, that like the UN warning, we have only 12 years to live, if you get down in the footnotes, the studies they cite show that so far there's been no statistically significant increase in the number of these catastrophic events.
Well, sir, I imagine you probably saw 60 Minutes on Sunday, and they had a big story about climate change and this lawsuit that all these kids are filing against the federal government. And it had a lot of bad news, I think, for climate change deniers. And it says that, basically the federal government has been forced to admit that they have seen this evidence for the last 50 years since Lyndon Johnson's administration, that there is damage being done to the planet. I wonder what you made of that story.
I mean, I just saw a series of claims of what the federal government has said, which were false. The federal government's own data show that, for example, the terrible tornadoes that occurred yesterday, if you look at those over a 10-year periods for the last 100 years, the rates of tornado strikes was just as high in 1920 as it is today. People confuse weather and climate. Climate's what happens over decades. You can have a storm, you can have a flood, you can have a hurricane. What climate statisticians like I do is look at the average over those decades and compare them to 120 years ago. That's why I say we have these extreme weather events. They are not attributable to the Earth being warmed by carbon dioxide, just a tiny, tiny amount.
Interesting. Okay, very interesting. Sir, thank you so much for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
We do appreciate it.
Pleasure to be with you.
All right. It is 15 minutes until the top of the hour. President Trump's approval ratings now back on the rise. So